There is a boat in a driveway in Hana on the far eastern edge of Maui. It has been there for more than 30 years, faded by the sun, weathered by salt air. The name on the hull, Sarah Joe, is barely visible beneath decades of silence. It is not in a museum. It is not on display. It is simply parked beside the road, a few hundred yards from the bay where it once launched. The boat came back. The men who took it out did not. 5 men. February 11th, 1979. A morning so calm the sea looked like a lake. Beneath that stillness, something was already changing. By the end of the day, a storm would scatter a search across 56,000 square miles of ocean and find nothing. For nearly 10 years, there was no answer. Then the boat reappeared, more than 2,000 miles from where it had vanished, on the shore of an uninhabited atoll. Beside it was a grave. One body was eventually identified. 4 men were still missing. The boat belonged to a young man named Robert Malayakini. He had named it after his parents, Sarah and Joe. Robert had a twin brother, Ralph, older by 15 minutes. On the morning of February 11th, Ralph borrowed the boat. 4 friends were joining him. All of them worked together on a construction crew. That Sunday, they decided to skip the job site. There was no major expedition planned. No long voyage. Just a day on the water. A little fishing. A few hours with friends. Ralph Malayakini, Scott Mormon, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, and Peter Hanchett. 5 men, all comfortable in the ocean, swimmers, surfers, divers. Benjamin Kalama, 38. His wife called him Benny. He had 2 young daughters at home. Patrick Wessner, 26. His younger brother Michael was only 16 months behind him. The 2 were close. They took little with them, no life jackets, no long-range radio, only the supplies needed for what was supposed to be a short day trip. They launched from Hana Bay in the late morning. The weather appeared calm, the water was smooth. Robert Malayakini would later remember the sea looking like a lake. Benjamin Kalama's wife, Ulu Helikahi, remembered the morning in much the same way. And the last time she saw her husband walking toward the pier. Between Maui and the Big Island lies the Alenuihaha Channel, one of the most dangerous stretches of water in Hawaii. The channel funnels wind between 2 massive volcanic mountains, Haleakala on Maui and Mauna Kea on the Big Island. When conditions change, the water can change with them. Calm can become violent in a matter of hours. By early afternoon, the wind had increased dramatically. By evening, the channel was producing waves estimated at around 40 feet. 40 feet against a 17-foot boat. The last known contact came several hours after the men departed. A radio message. The engine had died. That was all. Then the silence began. Ulu Helikahi stood near the Hana Pier that afternoon, watching the horizon for her husband. The water was no longer calm. The sea that had looked like a lake that morning had become something else entirely. Ulu called the police. The Coast Guard was notified. That night, local men from Hana went out in larger boats to search. Some of those boats were nearly thrown vertical by the swells. The following day, Robert Malayakini searched near the Big Island. During the search, he asked marine researcher John Norton to look for anything at all. The Coast Guard searched for 5 days. Military aircraft searched from above. Private boats and volunteers searched the surrounding waters and coastlines. The search area covered roughly 56,000 square miles of ocean, but there was no trace, no wreckage, no life jacket, no body, nothing. Eventually, the official search was called off. But in Hana, people continued looking, by land, by air, and by water. Days became weeks Weeks became months. Nicole Kalama Baker was 8 years old when her father disappeared. Decades later, she remembered the aftermath in a single image. It seemed to her that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The sea had taken 5 men and given Hana nothing back. The Sarah Joe was gone. Nearly 10 years passed. Then, in 1988, the Sarah Joe was found. Not in Hawaii, not near the Big Island, not anywhere along the route the search teams had expected. It was found in the Marshall Islands, more than 2,000 miles from Hana Bay. The discovery was made on Taongi Atoll, a remote ring of coral and sand in the northern Marshall Islands. Uninhabited, isolated, without a permanent population. There was little reason for anyone to be there. John Norton was conducting a wildlife survey on the atoll. The same John Norton Robert Malayakini had asked to help search for the missing men years earlier. Norton was walking along the shoreline when he saw it. A boat, sun-bleached, battered, scarred by a journey no 17-foot vessel should have been expected to survive. He checked the registration. Sarah Joe, the same boat that had vanished from Hana Bay in 1979. The same boat that had been searched for across thousands of square miles of ocean had somehow reached Taongi. The currents could provide one possible explanation: a disabled boat carried by wind and water over time. The exact journey remains uncertain. But the boat was not the only discovery. Nearby, Norton found a shallow grave. Stones had been arranged around the grave. A cross made from driftwood stood above it. Beside the grave was a pad of blank paper interleaved with aluminum foil. The meaning of those objects has been debated. Some investigators suggested they could be connected to ritual practices associated with Chinese or Taiwanese traditions. But the evidence did not provide a definitive answer. Someone had been there. Someone had found human remains, and someone had taken the time to bury a body. The remains were eventually exhumed and sent for identification. Dental records confirmed the identity. Scott Moorman, 27 years old, one of the 5 men who had left Hana Bay on a calm Sunday morning nearly 10 years earlier. He was the only one recovered. The other 4, Ralph Malayakini, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Westner, and Peter Hanchett, were still missing. They remain missing today. The discovery of the Sarah Joe did not solve the mystery. It made the mystery larger. The ocean currents could potentially explain how a disabled boat reached the Marshall Islands. The journey would have been extraordinary, but extraordinary does not necessarily mean impossible. The grave was different, because the grave suggested human intervention. Scott Moorman had not simply been left where he died. His remains had been buried. Stones had been placed around the site. A driftwood cross had been erected above it, and the paper and foil were left nearby. Someone had found him. Someone had made a decision. Someone had taken the time to bury him. And then that person, or those people, disappeared from the story. Was Scott Moorman alive when the Sarah Joe reached Taongi? Did he survive the storm? Did he drift for weeks or months before reaching the atoll? And if he arrived alive, did he eventually die there from dehydration, exposure, or illness? Could another member of the crew have survived long enough to help bury him? And if so, what happened to that person afterward? One proposed by private investigator Steve Goodenow involved illegal Chinese fishing activity in the Marshall Islands. A cross does not fit neatly into that explanation, so there may have been another person, another group, or another explanation entirely. The truth is, the evidence is too incomplete to say, we know what was found, we know what was not. Everything in between remains theory. The mystery belongs to the world. The loss belongs to Hana. When the Sarah Joe was found, the news did not bring simple closure. For the families, it reopened something that had never completely healed. Ulu Helakahi, Benjamin Kalama's widow, described the feeling as both happy and sad. The discovery brought everything back. One body had been found, one grave had been identified, but the discovery also made another possibility impossible to ignore. The other 4 men were probably never coming home. Nicole Kalama Baker had been a child when her father disappeared. Decades later, she and the other families were still living with the same absence. No final goodbye, no known grave, no definitive explanation. When the boat was found, hope returned briefly. Maybe one of the others would be found. Maybe the mystery would finally begin to unravel. Robert Malayakini traveled to Taongi Atoll in 1990. He went with a small team to search for more remains, for answers, for anything the initial investigation might have missed. He found nothing. When he returned to Hana, he had to face the other families who had allowed themselves to hope again. The Sarah Joe was eventually returned to him. The Coast Guard transported the boat back from the Marshall Islands. Robert parked it in his driveway. It remains there today. Robert Malayakini still goes fishing from Hana Bay. But he uses a different boat now. To him, the ocean is still home. "It's peaceful there," he said. The Sarah Joe case leaves behind a question no map can answer. What happened between the radio call and the grave? Several hours after the men launched, someone sent a message. The engine had died. Then the signal stopped. Between that moment and the discovery of the boat nearly 10 years later lies a gap of more than 2,000 miles, a storm, an unknown drift, at least one death. The sea does not explain itself. It takes what it takes. It returns what it returns. The Sarah Joe returned. Scott Moorman returned, or at least his remains did. The other 4 men did not. Ralph Malayakini, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, Peter Hanchett. 4 men whose final fate remains unknown. After the 30th anniversary of the disappearance, the families planted 5 Norfolk pine trees above Hana. 1 tree for each man. From one angle, only 4 are visible. From another, all 5 appear. Because this mystery depends on where you stand. From one angle, it is a tragedy. 5 men caught in a rapidly changing storm. A small boat overwhelmed by conditions no crew could control. From another angle, it is something far more difficult to explain. A boat that crossed an ocean, a grave dug by unknown hands, a body found on an island almost no one visits. There is a boat in a driveway in Hana. It has been there for more than 30 years. It does not look like a monument. It does not look like a grave marker. But in a way, it has become both. The name on the hull belonged to a mother and a father, Sarah and Joe, 2 people who raised twin sons on the edge of an island, at the edge of the ocean. Their son Ralph took that name out onto the water on a Sunday morning in 1979. He took 4 friends with him. The sea looked calm. They trusted it. Then the weather changed. The boat came back. The men did not. Ralph Malayakini, Scott Moorman, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, Peter Hanchett. 5 men who left Hana Bay on a morning when the water looked like glass. 1 was eventually found, 4 were not. And somewhere between the channel, the storm, and the distant shores of the Marshall Islands, the final chapter of their story disappeared. The families still remember them. The trees still stand above Hana, and the Sarah Joe still sits in a driveway carrying the name of the people who gave it to their son. A small boat, a vast ocean, a grave on an empty atoll, and 4 men whose final resting places remain unknown.